I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Can everyone hear me? Is this working? Okay, great. When the back row nods their head, it's a good sign. About 20 years ago, a patient I'm going to call Yvonne had an appointment with me, and kind of near the end of the appointment, she said, "There's something I'm really concerned about. I have to tell you about it." I was talking to a friend, and we were talking about something I know really well, and in the midst of talking about it, I couldn't find the word I wanted to say. I could find another word and substitute it, but I couldn't find the precise word I wanted. And I began to answer her because doctors like to find solutions before they hear the whole story. And she said, "No, wait, that's not all. I have more to tell you." I was at a party, and I was standing with a longtime dear friend of mine, and a newer friend walked up, and when I went to introduce them, I lost the name of the longer time friend. Am I going crazy? Am I losing my mind? Okay, can I talk now? And I assured her that what she was experiencing was some of the normal little glitches of an aging brain. If you would have it, maybe some of the blank spots in the green brain on the left. And since she's continued to see me for 20 years and her complaints haven't gotten any more severe than that, and in fact, probably less severe than that, we know that we've made progress in improving the health of her brain, and it's never going to progress to anything more severe than that. But when I am seeing or working with somebody whose brain complaints are more concerning, and more concerning is in the same conversation, I forget 3 or 4 times whether or not I made that dental appointment, or I find my keys in the freezer, or I don't recognize, not the name of, but I don't recognize the face of somebody I've known for a long time. Then we know that we're dealing with something that's really a more serious neurodegenerative disease. And up until a few years ago, I had glimmers of hope for those people. But what we can say now from work that has been done, which I'm going to share with you tonight, we know that those people can recover their brain, recover the volume and the vitality of their brain, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm speaking as a representative as the medical director of Northwest Memory Center in Ashland, where our focus is on brain health, getting it, keeping it, recovering it. And what I'm going to talk about tonight are 3 main things. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between what's a normal aging brain and what is Alzheimer's disease. We're going to talk about the brain health program that's been groundbreaking in recovering brain health to people who do have Alzheimer's disease, and some special tips for making it work. And I'm assuming nobody here has Alzheimer's disease, but everybody here, well, not those 2 children in the back, but everybody here of a certain age is going to encounter times where there's lapses in their memory or problems with their brain, and the little things that help them added together become the big program for someone with Alzheimer's, but all the tips can be useful for anyone. So let's start with the question, first of all, of what is Alzheimer's disease? And so, as I told my patient 20 years ago, having a moment where you can't find the right word, or even where you lose the name of a familiar person, is not that worrisome. Are you able to keep doing your job? Are you able to do the reports you need to do and perform in whatever way you need to do at your job? That's a normal aging brain. If things are worse than that, then we consider it some kind of dementia, which is specifically the inability to make new memories. That something you learned yesterday, you can't remember today. It can progress even farther and become Alzheimer's disease, and then it affects more aspects of memory where you lose the familiarity of people that you know, and you have some emotional effects as well, which can be anger or impatience or depression. How many people here know somebody who has known someone who has Alzheimer's disease? So yeah, you know, it's touched all of us. The numbers are staggering. Just if you look at the numbers, 5.7 million people in the United States today have Alzheimer's disease. But that number is so small compared to the number of people affected. Everyone in an Alzheimer's patient's life is affected. Their partner and their close family affected most of all, but their minister, their dentist, their doctor, their book group, everyone changes the way they operate their life around that person when they are no longer the person that they first knew. Alzheimer's was first named over 100 years ago. In the 1890s, there was a woman named Auguste Dietary who complained to her doctor of memory loss and things that he was able to identify as delusions. And he admitted her to the hospital, a mental hospital, and met with her every day and talked with her and asked her what was happening. And he could ask her her name. She might be able to come up with her first name. But she began making less and less sense to him. But she said some really eloquent things about Alzheimer's disease. She said, "Where are you?" So one of the questions I ask patients if I'm doing a little cognitive exam, I say, "Where are we now?" And she would answer, "I'm here, I'm there, I'm everywhere, and I can't find myself. I'm nowhere." They kept a relationship through her life, and Dr. Alzheimer, who didn't live much beyond his patient in this case, was able to examine her brain. And that's how we know that the brain of someone with Alzheimer's literally gets smaller than a normal brain. And from the very first autopsy, we know that it's not only shrunken, but there are little scars on it. They're called plaques, and they were named amyloid. They're a little bit like another substance called amyloid, which we see in other parts of the body at different times. And we've thought of that as the characteristic markings of Alzheimer's. And up until about 10 or 15 years ago, we would say to somebody, "I think your parent, your mother," so 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women, and 2/3 of all Alzheimer's caregivers are women. And 2/3 of this audience tonight is women. But we would have said, "I think your mom has Alzheimer's disease, but we won't know until we do an autopsy when she dies." But that is no longer the case. We can make quite a concise diagnosis in a living person now from a variety of tests, starting with some tests that are routinely done in the office and going on to all the different kinds of ways we can visualize what's actually going on in the brain, whether it's a spinal tap, and in taking out some spinal fluid, we can see some beta amyloid, amyloid beta. And then the scans of the brain begin to change a few years later. The tricky thing about this whole progress is if we took pictures of everybody's brains would start to change before people do. So if you're going to have any brain deterioration, you have the deterioration before you begin to worry about words or before your family members begin to worry about you. The smarter you are, the longer you can cover up for yourself. The smarter people are diagnosed the latest. Cognitive decline is the last symptom to appear. So having the combination of amyloid by some visualization and dementia is as common as 10% in our mid-60s, becoming more common in our mid-80s. So it's actually 5.7 million people now and 15 million by 2050, the middle of the century, which used to sound so far away. Doesn't really anymore. So it's the third leading cause of death. And how do people die? And I must say, when I knew this kind of statistic in medical school, I thought, oh, they're distracted, they don't eat, nobody takes care of them. But it's actually much more complicated than that. All the processes in our body that can make any person sick are ramped up double in a person with Alzheimer's disease. Their genetics, their blood sugar, their levels of inflammation, their cholesterol, all get abnormal right along with them with their brain. Well, now, isn't that interesting? That might lead somebody to think that it's not just the amyloid beta, because that's not what they die from. They don't die from the amyloid beta. Anybody over 50 here is a candidate for having some amyloid beta in their brain. It may not even impair your ability to think. It definitely doesn't kill you. Our current state of therapy is not very good. There was a lot of excitement this week about a new drug. You know, every other day there's excitement about something. But the new drug is really not much different than either one of these two drugs. And these are the only two drugs on the market, specifically for Alzheimer's, and both of them will slow or diminish a little bit of the manifestations of the disease. But if you look at the time of progress from onset of symptoms to likelihood of death and disability and death, that progress does not change with these medications. May briefly slow the course of the disease, but will not alter the overall time frame, which has led the American Academy, the Alzheimer's organization, to make this statement, and this is still on their website, that of all the top 10 leading causes of death, Alzheimer's is the only one that can't be prevented or slowed or cured. But that's actually changed. So in September of 2014, now we're going to talk about the Brain Health Program, because this is what came out of the work of Dr. Dale Bredesen, now almost 4 years ago. So he was a brain researcher. He's working in a lab. He didn't really see patients, and he was investigating this drug in mice and that drug in guinea pigs. And his wife, who's a family doctor, kept saying, honey, you know, I think it's going to be diet and lifestyle. I think it's going to be diet and lifestyle. You know, they die of heart disease and diabetes and all. What if you took care of all that? So finally, in about 2012, he said, all right. Why don't you find 10 patients among your colleagues, you know, patient population, and we'll intervene with all the diet and lifestyle things. Because there had been a lot of research on diet and lifestyle, and it had been shown that if you have a lot of people with dementia and you normalize their vitamin B12 level, not normalize it, but actually make it great, a great B12 level, a certain amount of them will recover from their dementia. Well, what if you do that with 30 different things? Their B12, their homocysteine, their blood sugar, their thyroid. So he followed these 10 patients who had diagnosed Alzheimer's disease, including brain shrinking on MRI, and he administered to them this therapeutic protocol that we're going to go over tonight. And he would say that for a person to develop Alzheimer's disease, they have the equivalent of 30 leaky holes in their roof. And you have to patch about 20 of them. Nobody has to do everything. And these people recovered marvelously. So in 3 to 6 months, 9 out of 10 of them were markedly better. And when he sent them for repeat MRIs, the radiologist called and said, I made a terrible mistake. Well, what do you mean you made a terrible mistake? Well, I read that previous MRI is 35% brain volume, and now there's 60%, and we know that doesn't happen. So he altered the previous report to 50 and the new one to 55, so they were within the range of error. So Dr. Bredesen actually had to send out all the MRIs independently to people who were not part of the reporting protocol to get it validated that people did really regrow brain volume on their MRI. And he's written about this brain health program in a book called The End of Alzheimer's, and that's what we're going to talk about. What's in the 300-page book. The point that he would make, or that I want to make a few points about your brain. So whether you're, the brightest bulb in the pack, the brightest kid in the class or not, your brain is brilliant. It's done a lot of amazing things. It keeps your heart beating, it keeps your eyes working, it got you here tonight, helps you filter out noise, decide what you're going to remember, what you're not going to remember. Your brain does an amazing variety of things. And to do all those things, it's really hungry for really precious nutrients of all different sorts, not just from food, but from other places in the body. If your thyroid makes thyroid hormone, your brain needs it. Your pancreas makes insulin, your brain needs it. It needs things from all sorts of regions for it to be as healthy as it can be. Now, the tricky thing is that your brain is also really sensitive. And what I mean by that is I'm going to talk about in these next 2 slides, or maybe just one, which is really science-y. So imagine the sort of shaded part on the lower part of the screen is the inside of the cell of your body. This is something that I didn't learn until medical school, but your body's made up of all cells everywhere, little tiny kind of spherical things. You've got cells in your muscles, cells in your skin, cells in your hair, cells everywhere. And on any kind of growing and particularly thriving part of your body, the cell membrane, the line goes, so this cell would really be, this big. But the cell membrane is crossed by a protein. And no matter where this happens in the body, whether it's in your brain or not, it's called an amyloid precursor protein. As if your body was planning to make amyloid from the very beginning, even in your leg when it's growing, that is so, what a strange thing. But there it sits. And that protein spans the distance from the outside of the cell to the inside. And on the outside of the cell, it's like an antenna. It's saying, how are things out here? Is there enough B12? Is there too much chlorine in the air? Am I inhaling too much smoke? Have I been fed properly? And if everything is just right, it sends the message back down to the inside of the cell and says, everything's going great. Keep on growing. Be as healthy as you can. We're doing great out here. And if it detects, on the other hand, that things aren't so great in the outside world, it has 2 choices. It can break in 2 in the pattern on the left. And this is your luck if you are not prone to getting Alzheimer's disease. It says, I know there's a better day ahead. I'm just going to shut things down for a while. The breaking on the left is more like a pause button. We're just not going to grow right now, but things will get better soon. If you have certain genetics, you may be more likely to break your protein in bad circumstances in the way on the right. And on the way on the right, it says, I've given up hope. We're just shutting things down. Makes kind of a nasty scar on the surface of the cell, and it's more likely to attract amyloid as scar tissue. Now, amyloid can come in as a Band-Aid, and if it stays there for very long, it becomes scar tissue. But it came in because that precursor protein broke in the setting of a disharmonious environment. So really what you want is not to take away the amyloid beta off that scar. You want to keep feeding that beautiful protein in the middle so it has everything it wants. You want it to know that if it does break, you can clean up the amyloid and restore things for it. And it really can go on being happy and keeping the cell below it, which in this case we're thinking about is all your brain cells, happy and thriving. So it's clear that the perfect drug for reversing Alzheimer's would do all these things. These are all the things that that protein either does or responds to. If we could get a drug that would do all this, we could fix Alzheimer's disease. Yeah. I can barely read that whole page. We could never come up with a drug that does all that. So what he's come up with instead is a therapeutic protocol that I'm calling tonight a brain health program. And it consists of a brain healthy diet, a brain friendly lifestyle, supplements to feed your brain, and sort of separate from supplements, but we do need to replace hormones when they're lost in people as they get older. So what we do if somebody's a new patient at the clinic, we first try and figure out where they are. We do look at their genetics. We give a little evaluation of the brain, which can be a pretty simple 5-minute test that we do in the office, the MOCA test that our president famously passed last year. Or it might be a longer kind of 45-minute test that we do on a computer. We order labs and get an MRI. And then we also do some specialty labs that are beyond the scope of what you would get from a normal medical evaluation. To just say briefly about the genetics, so the genetics that put people in risk is the presence of the gene ApoE4. So throughout your genetics, you have an ApoE gene, and you have a copy of it from your mom and a copy of it from your dad. And each copy can be either a 2, a 3, or a 4. And your you're good if you've got a 2 and a 2 or a 2 and a 3 or a 3 and a 3, but where you come into more troubles if you have one copy of 4 from one parent, or worse, a copy of ApoE4 from both parents, and it increases your risk significantly, as is written below. These risk increases are really for people, you know, if you walked through Costco and found out whose genetics were which, and they were not necessarily, you know, there were some people there who were really healthy, some people who weren't healthy. These are general public increases in risk, but they're pretty compelling. So it's good to know what your genetics are because the problem can be prevented. They are part of the risks we cannot change. This is a relatively short list. You can't change your genetics, your age, and even if you change your gender, it probably doesn't change your risk of this. But look at this. This is the list of risks we can modify. All these are places where we can do things to make a normally aging brain healthier or a really suffering brain thrive again. As we go through this, we're going to start with a dietary strategy. And while I'm talking about food, I'm going to invite you to sort of join along with me quietly in your own mind a little bit. And as I'm going to go through, 10 aspects of a brain healthy diet, I want you to think to yourself, I'm doing really well with that. I get an A for that. That's great. I do that all the time anyway. I don't need to hear that. And then I want you to pay attention to something that you go, I don't do that, but I'd be open to trying it, or I've thought about that before, or maybe I can do that. So pay attention to your A's, good job, and your maybes. Maybe I'll try that. Come up with one in this dietary strategy. So when we talk about what people should eat for their brains, this slide means a lot because we encourage people to eat meals and to not eat in between. And not only to not eat in between meals, but after dinner, to go 3 hours without eating before bed, and then to make it a full 13 hours between dinner and breakfast. Now, not only is this good for your brain, it's good for your sleep, which is good for your brain and good for your mood. And it also is good for your immune system, a marked reduction in certain cancers by going on a 13-hour overnight fast. So it's kind of like a good idea for anybody. The cancers it's effective against are breast, colon, prostate, and some brain cancers. Those are pretty big ones. So 13 hours overnight, no food between meals. And, it's the kind of thing where I say to somebody, you don't want to snack anymore. If you're starving, snack. But tomorrow, eat a bigger lunch so that you don't need to snack at 3 o'clock. And each meal should have the basic food groups: protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And in proteins, there are a lot of choices. Let's see, we encourage people to get protein of highest quality. So there should be some meat on there. Oh yeah, there's a little meat over there. That's pasture-raised meat. You can tell because it's kind of red. And the fish, you can tell, is wild-caught fish from cold water. And the eggs are from backyard chickens. And the one protein on here that we don't encourage people as a main source of protein is grains. There are some beans and nuts, which are kind of the more vegetarian sources of protein along with eggs, but grains are not really brain-friendly. Moving on to carbohydrates, which are the sugars in our diet. These are all great choices. Mostly vegetables, a few fruits, all different colors, giving us a lot of phytonutrients. And one of my friends who's a doctor who works closely with Dr. Bredesen, she likes to say, think of your plate as a plot of real estate, and 2/3 or 3/4 of it should be filled up with these guys. Now, I happen to like a big steak, but I appreciate what she's saying. And the carbohydrates that are not so great for your brain, sorry, doesn't mean you can never have them. But certainly in a brain recovery period, you might go without them for a while. And everybody has a personal tolerance. I had a patient today who I encouraged her actually once a week to have a carb-rich meal, not with gluten because she can't eat gluten, but with any fruits and even ice cream if she wanted it. But to each his or her own. It's individualized. The fats we want to focus on are largely the fats we get from food. So these are really healthy examples of fat. Any doctor who really focuses much on nutrition probably made the mistake. I'm looking at my former self. You told people not to eat saturated fat, right? I was wrong. So we've all become less fat phobic, starting certainly since 2010, when the first big study came out showing that saturated fat does not cause heart disease. But since then, study after study really looking at how a fat can be healthy and how a fat can be unhealthy. And so, yes, eggs and even breakfast meat in the eggs can be really healthy. I think everybody would agree that avocados and fish are probably among the healthiest diet for everybody, and we're drizzling olive oil over both of these plates. Now, fats are an interesting category of fuel. Let's think about it. So we need fuel for different things in our bodies. We need fuel to think, and we need fuel to run across the street. And to run across the street, I can either burn sugars, which we just talked about, or the fats we just talked about to run across the street. To burn fats, to fuel my brain, I can't use fats because fats are a really gigantoid molecule that can't cross into the brain. So sugars can get me across the street. Sugars can help my brain work. Fats can get me across the street, but they can't help my brain work. So your body takes that big, clunky molecule and runs it through the liver and makes a smaller molecule called a ketone. And that ketone goes into the brain, and that is your brain's favorite food. If your brain got to choose between sugar and ketones, your brain would choose ketones. Where you get ketones, so when you don't eat, your body will turn your body fat into ketones, and that's a skill that the body knew beautifully when you were a breastfeeding baby. Those of you who are so lucky. But our bodies forget because most of us have eaten a carb-rich diet for most of our adult lives. So we have to kind of train our bodies to burn fat again, and we can do that a little bit by this 13-hour fast and by not snacking between meals. But there are particular dietary fats that encourage your body to make ketones, and particularly the ones that come from coconut oil and the coconut oil derivatives. And my favorite derivatives, one of which is in my broth right here, are medium-chain triglyceride oils. So in coconut oil, you have an array of a bunch of different kinds of oils and ingredients that do good things and different things, and some of them upset your gut a little bit. And they extract out the MCT oil for the most salient effect on the brain with the least effect on the gut. And you can either get it just in plain oil, and this oil is sold at, I think, all the health food stores around here. And now our favorite ketone powder, which enables you to have a longer, slower, sustained absorption of the ketone and benefit from it in your brain. And this is a great way to encourage people to not snack. Oh, I just can't go from lunch to dinner without eating something. At the end of lunch, have some MCT oil powder in a hot liquid, and that will give you sustained ketones through the afternoon, make it easier to get to dinner. Okay, so that's the food part of it. So you've thought about your A, and you've thought about your maybe. Maybe I'll try that. Because now we're going to go on to the lifestyle part of it. And the lifestyle part of it is all about the proper alternation of work and rest. The most important part of the rest is that you get natural sleep for 8 hours. Benadryl, Unisom, those are not natural sleep. That there's some kind of exercise that you do every day. Every day it'd be great to do something as if you really lived outside and you were some kind of a farmer. You know, you walk around, you see the sun, you see the afternoon sun, you interact a little bit with people, and you move your body around. But like a farmer, a couple times a week you have to do something really hard, lifting some bales of hay or, helping that cow out of the ditch. And twice a week you're just an athlete and you do something really fast, some kind of interval. So some degree of working throughout your week with a couple days focused on pretty intensive exertion. So during this work and rest discussion, you're going to think again, what's the thing I'm already doing? What's the thing that maybe I'd be willing to try? You know what I meant to say is I'm going to talk for about another 15 or 20 minutes. We're going to have lots of time for questions. It's also important that you work your brain. Give it some exercise, give it some challenge, and ideally some way that can interact with you, can figure out if you're getting it or not, can make it harder or easier, and that you can see you're improving. I'll tell you about a couple of those. And then some way, just as you sleep your whole body at night, it'd be really great for you to find ways to de-stress your brain. And that's what we talked about when we were here last month, and I'll give you some examples of that too. So the 2 brain exercise, I bet a lot of people have heard of one of these. Lumosity sponsors on JPR, I think. So these are both interactive, web-based programs that do some degree of reading you and positioning you in relation to other people of your age and you today compared to you a month ago. So you can see if you've made progress. They both have a free version and a paid version. And for people who are really concerned about their brain, I encourage them to do the paid version, and I tell them this is their new job. People particularly hate Brain HQ. It's hard. Who's done Brain HQ? Don't you think it's hard? That's what people say. It's really hard and it's fast. And it's the one that has the best science that if you do nothing else and you just do Brain HQ, your brain's going to get better. So I encourage people to do it and just consider it their job. But if they'll only do Lumosity, that's great too. It's important to find some way to relax. So while we're watching this, I want you to breathe in with breathe out. Breathe in with the expanding shapes. Breathe out. As you breathe in, find one part of your body where you feel the breath and feel it leave. And meditation is, of course, just deciding you're going to do this for 5 or 15 minutes. And your mind is going to wander, but then you're going to come back. Oh, right, my breath. I'm going to breathe in, and I'm going to breathe out. If you're doing it right. There's no way to do this wrong. For people who do like to measure their progress, however, the app on the left is called HeartMath, and the app is free. The little earlobe monitor device costs about $120, and you plug it into your mobile device, and that center pinwheel expands and contracts, and you get green when you've matched your breath well to the expanding design, and you get a red when you're not doing so well, you know. So my goal is always to get green all the way around. And then there's meditation. One thing to remember about meditation, it is great to sit down and meditate for 5 or 15 minutes, and the benefits that accrue from that have been documented in every field of medicine. You know, yes, your brain's better, your heart's better, less cancer, blah, blah, blah. And it's still hard for people to do it. That's, I'd say, the thing that this lives perpetually in my maybe column, and sometimes I do it, and then it goes back to maybe. So we had a meditation teacher here with us last month, and she said, remember, anybody can do this right now. Pay attention to every part of your body as you inhale in, really full breath, and then pay complete attention to it with your exhale, and then let it all go, and you're done. That's it. So that's another good break you can take during the day. The thing I like about meditation, or even this HeartMath, is you can do this at the departure gate for Alaska Airlines at Medford Airport when you found out you just have to stand in line to reschedule with 50 other people. So people say I do Tai Chi, or I like to walk in nature to meditate, and all those are great. And it's also great to come up with something you can just do anywhere. So you've done all this lifestyle work. You've revised your diet, and now you're doing some degree of work and relaxation in your life. And now it's time to work a little bit with your bodily fluids through some nice lab testing and doing precision house cleaning for aspects of your internal health that we'd like to be better than just within normal limits. Blood sugar. As we get older, we all get a little bit of a problem with blood sugar. And you can see it that way more people my age than those children's age have expanding waistlines. That's a little bit of insulin resistance. Whenever you have some insulin resistance in your body, a little bit of waistline, you have more insulin resistance in your brain. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, when you have insulin resistance in your brain, you get extra insulin floating around, just like you do in your body. Well, is that a problem? Well, it does have to be cleaned up. Well, how do you clean up insulin? You clean up insulin with something called insulin-degrading enzyme. Great. Well, just put it to work if there's insulin there. That's too bad because it had another job it was going to do, but it will always clean up insulin first. Its other job is to clean up amyloid. So if you wanted to clean up amyloid, it'd be great if it didn't have so much work it had to put in to clean up the extra insulin in your brain. And you'll do it that favor by keeping your blood sugars low. And following the diet the way we talked about it, going long periods between meals, going long periods overnight, and having your food consist of healthy choices with low sweets, you'll lower your blood sugar. Homocysteine is an amino acid that the body recycles. And I think if you get a typical lab slip, it'll say the normals are between 4 and I don't know how high they go, because for brain health and really for cardiovascular health, we want that number between 5 and 8. So that's a little different ratcheting than you might do with a regular looking at it from a medical point of view. Vitamins and minerals. Check your, I had somebody in today, and what's your B12 level? Oh, it's 300. That's normal. I said, no. There's a bunch of things that B12 should be doing that you are missing those things being done. So we're going to get your B12 up. And you've been on vitamins. How does this happen that it's 300 when you've been on vitamins? So we're going to get it up to 1200. And then inflammation. Inflammation is being seen as really the key focus of almost, if not causative to, almost any disease. It's crucial to cancer, it's crucial to heart disease, and it's crucial to the brain. So your brain, inflammation can happen when there are things amiss in your brain and your body goes to work to try and fix them, and the resulting process can cause some inflammatory debris in your brain. The way you clean that up is by sleeping at night, not 1 hour, 2 hours. After 5 hours of sleep, your brain goes into this state where the tissue of your brain shrinks, not like Alzheimer's disease, but it just contracts, and fluid called glymphatic fluid flushes out the spaces between the brain and clears out the debris from the inflammation created the day before. So the first thing you can do for inflammation is that great sleep. But we also use other substances to reduce inflammation. We replace hormones to an optimal level. Female hormones, male hormones, thyroid for everybody, and pregnenolone, the hormone that nobody's heard about that you can buy at the health food store, that's the mother of all hormones in your brain. It helps your brain cells myelinate or separate from each other so they can have good communication without setting each other off. And they help neurotransmitters, the little messengers in the brain, work great. So we like to optimize all those. Hormones, there are a lot of different ways. We particularly address people who have ApoE4 and probably have acquired some amyloid beta. Each of these we could talk about for an hour, but I'm not going to. Ashwagandha. So Dr. Bredesen was encouraged in this diet and lifestyle program to expand his horizon and start using some Ayurvedic herbs. And so some of these are very common to anybody who lives in Southern Oregon. Ashwagandha is a very popular one, Not everybody will take ashwagandha, but I'll choose it for somebody who I think has some amyloid, who needs some help calming. This is a wonderful combination, something that both can calm you and help you sleep well through the night and can boost your energy. So it's an adaptogenic herb, comes in a tincture form or in capsules. There's about half a dozen different Ayurvedic herbs that may be part of anybody's individual protocol. It would be great to reduce inflammation so there's not so much to clean up. And we do it with an anti-inflammatory diet. And all the foods on the left are anti-inflammatory, all those nice colors. And the food on the right is probably the biggest offender of inflammation. So all that, when I was a kid, I didn't know this, but if I had been to McDonald's, the French fries would have been cooked in lard, which is a great stable fat at high temperatures. But now, in an interest of being more healthy, they're cooked in vegetable oil, which is really unstable at high temperatures. And so we're giving everyone a serving of trans fats, which we've all come to learn are not good for our heart, when they get foods cooked at high temperatures in vegetable oil. Fish oil is one of the most effective anti-inflammatory supplements we can take. Has to be of high quality because fish oil that hasn't been properly prepared is more hazardous than no fish oil at all. It's great if it has some extra DHA in it, and this is something that can be vegetarian as well. There are algae sources of fish oil. Like to fuel the brain with supplements that enhance brain energy. I don't think this is a real photograph. I think it's a drawing of one of the little powerhouses. We've got hundreds of them inside the nucleus of each cell in our body, mitochondria. And many common drugs we take, antidepressants, antibiotics, and this is the one that gets me the most, antihistamines that people take for sleep are hazardous to the health of their mitochondria, which is probably the mechanism that connects antihistamine use and increased rate of dementia, which is pretty clear. Also increased death rate with frequent use of those antihistamines. Some of the supplements that we use have actually been observed to grow new brain connections. And we've done this mostly in animals, but given them things that light up their brains and observe them under conditions of work and rest, which that cycle that we talked about of exercise, your body or your brain, and resting your body or your brain, that helps grow new brain connections, as can these supplements. And then along with antihistamines, these are all the drugs that we know that can interfere with the health of the mitochondria and the energy of the brain. So as much as possible, I like to get people to avoid these. So there's 3 basic steps. It's real. All of these slides, they really can be condensed into 3 simple points. Eat for ketones. I want you to think about what you're already doing that you can congratulate yourself for, and think about that one thing that you might try that might be a little different. Ask me a question about it if you have one. I'd like you to think about working and resting both your body and your brain, both really actively, taking some active participation in different forms, walking, lifting weights, rowing hard or cycling. Sleeping, really good sleep. We're going to have a whole presentation here just about sleep. Rachel has that schedule out front. And then really making it work for you, getting enough familiarity with your own laboratory tests to hook it up with the supplements that's needed. I really encourage people who want to do this kind of process in a serious way to work with a physician. There's also a series of articles on my website and at the Northwest Memory Center website of do-it-yourself brain health. So somebody could, with a cooperative doctor, do all this stuff without the help of a brain-trained doctor. The brain-trained doctors so there's about 1,000 of us around the world who've worked with Dr. Bredesen and continue to work with him. He has a monthly series for us all where we get to interact with him and ask questions. MPI, that's his book, the title of his book again. The second line is his website. We can keep up with what he's doing. ApoE4.info. There is a woman named Julie who's in her 40s, and she kind of didn't notice that she was slowly losing her mind. But somebody else got in the car and saw her take the sticky off her dashboard, which said, "Remember to drive on the right side of the road." Aren't you glad you didn't live in her neighborhood? So they encouraged her to go to a doctor. And she went to a doctor, and he said, "Oh, you have 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene from all the tests we've done." And she's in her early 40s. "You have Alzheimer's disease." Well, what can I do about that? I'm sure there's something I can do about it. And he said, "Good luck with that." So she's actually worked with Dr. Bredesen. They made a film called Good Luck with That, which if it ever comes out, you should see because I'm going to be in it. But she has a website that's all crowdsourcing, that's up people with 1 or 2 copies of ApoE4 who are helping each other figuring out how do you do a ketogenic diet so it works for you. I encourage people to get genetic testing. I'm a little down on 23andme.com because they, like everybody else, been acquired by a big drug company. I don't think these topics are really right. Get the proper topics from Rachel. So at Northwest Memory Center, Northwest Memory Care, we kind of have 2 names. I went to do an interview at The Valley. Did anybody hear my interview on The Valley? It was on his Facebook page today. I'll have to tell him that he better run it again. And he says, "Oh, well, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I hear that you're working with this group called Northwest Memory Center." And I went, "Oh my God, we named it Northwest Memory Care, but it should be Northwest Memory Center." So I went back to the office that day and told Rachel to start changing the name. So we're in the process of changing. But we are a team. There's myself and 1 other physician now, and I think we'll have another one in January. We have 2 health coaches, one of whom is here, Karen. Raise your hand. We have a nutritionist who's very skilled at a number of things, but particularly now expert at working with the Bredesen Protocol and people who have dietary questions and need to have it suited to them. Rachel's our master of everything. She's the wizard who makes it work. You met her when she came in. And we have another office manager named Anne. And anybody have any questions? Yes, so you don't eat, it doesn't count as food. So the question, we'll repeat the question, very good. When someone is fasting overnight, does black coffee with nothing in it count as breaking your fast? And no, it has to be calories. So coffee with cream in it counts as breaking your fast. Black coffee, or in my case, green tea, also very good for your brain. Both of them doesn't count as breaking the fast. Putting MCT oil in it would be breaking the fast.
Now, MCT oil is coconut oil minus lauric acid.
Yes.
Some say the MCT is so much better. Some places give a lot of credit to lauric acid for other things. If you can tolerate straight up coconut oil, is there a downside?
Is there a downside to coconut oil? So coconut oil is caprylic acid, lauric acid. I mean, it's a variety of acids, and it has other things in it that are good for immune health. And so there are other benefits to coconut, but if your goal, so one of the things I kind of took out to keep it in 45 minutes is when we put someone on a ketogenic diet, we want them to make ketones. We actually measure their ketones. And what we're finding is that 0.5 is a great level, 1 is better, 2 is better, 4 and 5 are even better. And you'll get better levels of ketones the longer you've trained your body to make them, and the more refined your source of MCT oil is. There's 3, and I can never. It's C6, C8, and C10, and it probably was on that slide.
Third one question is, along with, I like ice cream, but it's really bad sugar, and I get drowsy afterwards. If I eat a no sugar added ice cream, I know it's chemicals. Which is worse for me? I don't mean predictably.
Yeah, what's worse? So what's best for you? So how can I eat ice cream with the least guilt and damage, right? So for people who have no real sugar problems, where they They're not getting belly fat. They don't have insulin resistance. They can certainly have ice cream made with real sugar every once in a while. What I'm going to put on the website tomorrow or soon this week, remind me, Rachel, is an ice cream recipe that I've shared with patients who are on the protocol, who they themselves can't remember not to eat ice cream, so their partner makes them ice cream with heavy fat and xylitol. Xylitol gives some people horribly upset stomachs, but if you can tolerate it, it's a really good ice cream, and it would be the best of both worlds. So xylitol is much better for you than aspartame or saccharin, and it tastes much better than stevia.
But some of them are mannatones. Those are really ketones too, in a way.
Right. So the thing about there's a depending on how bad your blood sugar balancing issues are, we can give two people iced tea sweetened with stevia, and one of them, their body goes, there's no sugar in this. I'm fine. I'm not doing it. I'm not getting excited about this. And the other one tastes the sweet, and they go, oh my God, sweet. I think sugar's coming. And it makes insulin, and really insulin's more of the problem than sugar. So it's all on how people react.
One of your slides, one of the early ones, you had a statistic or number that the projection, I think it was something like 5 million people with Alzheimer's or
Alzheimer's, yeah.
and then by 2050, anticipated 50 million.
Uh-huh.
Now, I don't understand that. Is that because the population is growing, or is the proportion of people getting?
That's a really good question, and the answer is yes and yes. So we are having a greater surviving aged population than we did 30 years ago. But if you look among 70-year-olds now and 70-year-olds 3 decades ago, more of today's 70-year-olds have diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, which they're surviving. And with all those things, they have more dementia because the mechanics of getting all those diseases really overlap. So yes, we're living longer, so there's more of us, and we're sicker, so there's more of us, more of the people with Alzheimer's.
So the follow-up question would be, we're sicker because our lifestyles have changed so dramatically?
I mean, if you look at if you look at the pictures from Woodstock, there's not an obese person in the crowd. It's fields and fields. Somebody was reminding me of something that happened in Golden Gate Park, when I was there in the 60s, and fields of people, nobody was overweight. But in the 1970s, the US dietary guidelines were beginning to worry, and they were under the misconception that saturated fat is problematic. So we were told to eat less saturated fat, and for the last 40 years we have. We were told to eat less red meat, so over the last 40 years we have. We were told to eat more chicken, and we have over the last 40 years, and we were told to eat more fruits and vegetables, and those haven't been all healthy choices, but we have. So we've really, as a country, followed the dietary guidelines, but we did better 100 years ago when you'd go to a potluck in the country, and it was all meat and ribs and maybe a few ears of corn, but mostly we were a more meat-centered diet up until the early part of last century, and it began to change. So people cite the beginning of the diabetes epidemic, which we are in a diabetes epidemic. It started climbing upward in the early 1900s as table sugar became widely available, and it really peaked upward starting in the 1970s. And I think it's hard to argue that it's complex, of course, but more ready access to sugars and different kinds of adverse carbohydrates are a key part of it.
I thought that Dr. Bredesen's formula for people without ApoE4G was the 12-hour fast, 3 hours of fast before bedtime, maybe 16 hours if you do have 1 or 2 ApoE4s. But has it changed?
No, Dr. Bredesen's recommendation is that your overnight fast is somewhere between 12 13, 14, or 15, 16 hours, depending if you have 0, 1, or 2 copies of the gene. I'm also really interested in you not getting breast cancer and colon cancer, so I make it 13 hours. That's the Gordon protocol.
Can you be a vegan using beans and veggies as your protein and healthy fats and still create enough ketones?
I knew someone was going to ask me that tonight, so I thought about it as I was driving through Phoenix. So it's pretty easy to do it as a vegetarian. So there's doctors that do this protocol for either diabetes or cognitive health in India, and they say they just really have to eat. So if you can eat eggs, so I will get to your question, but eating eggs and dairy makes it really pretty easy to do. So with the vegetarians in India, they eat more eggs than dairy, but they can eat dairy, and more dairy than, so the trick is how you get your protein and your fats. Eggs and dairy are great ways to get protein and fat. So if you're a vegan, you're taking those things out. So then the question is where you're going to get your fat. So you're going to get it from avocados, avocado oil, coconut, things like that. The question is, can you get enough proteins without overwhelming carbohydrates? So the main sources of protein in a vegan diet would be nuts and seeds, pretty good, beans, not quite so good, but pretty good, and grains, really not so good. So theoretically, it's possible, I would think, to accomplish this protocol as a vegan. 2 issues. You really would have to work to get enough fat and to, say, well, I can't eat all the beans and rice that they're serving me here. I'm going to have mostly beans, a lot of avocado, and then a lot of salad, because I don't want to have too many carbohydrates. So that you'd have to work a little bit with your diet. You'd have to check your own blood response to it to see if you were making ketones. And then you'd have to address how much you're willing to supplement. So a really important balance in your brain is the balance between copper and zinc. You need them both, but you need more zinc than you need copper. As you get older, it's easier to absorb copper and harder to absorb zinc. And a vegan diet is rich in copper and doesn't have any zinc, really. Pumpkin seeds, I think. Pumpkin seeds. So, they're going to have to supplement with zinc. They wouldn't take fish oil, but they could take algae oil if they're willing to eat algae. So it's definitely possible to do, but more challenging for a vegan. Vegetarian, no problem. I'm ready to work with a vegetarian. Yes, that's a really good question. I'm so glad somebody asked. So men have this luxury of having testosterone their whole life. For the benefit of the tribe, I stopped having the ability to have children when I was 50. But for my own benefit, it would be really good to keep my hormones all my life. So, and various ways over the late 20th century, doctors tried to give women estrogen, rarely estrogen, they gave them horse estrogen, but in the attempt to make them healthier, and always something sort of fell out. Oops, we'd have to give them progesterone or they'll get uterine cancer. And then in 2003, the biggest study that was done stopped because there was a slight uptick in breast cancer, not a big one, but a slight uptick in breast cancer. We have re-examined that data with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass, and the estrogen was not increasing the breast cancer. It was and it was a synthetic estrogen. I mean, I'm not praising the estrogen, but it didn't do any harm. It was the synthetic progestin that accounted for all the rise in breast cancer. So, with menopausal women, they lose the estrogen, and your brain has receptors for estradiol that even work. So, a study just came out of Korea in the last month or two, where they took women 65 to 85, and we would say in this country, you're past your prime, sweetheart. It's too late for you. You've missed the therapeutic window for your brain. But they took these women 65 to 85, and there was significant brain recovery in most of them. So, colleagues of mine, they're doing this with me. So I've started people in their 80s on estrogen, and if they don't feel any benefit, they don't feel any better from it, we don't have to continue it. But a lot of them really are so happy to get their brains back. And then we make sure that they're not getting any of the risks by doing it safely.
For any kind of fasting blood test, especially glucose, what is the ideal time from the last meal you had or food of any kind until the needle goes in? It seems to, 8 hours, 10 hours?
Right. So the ideal time to take a fasting blood test, I would say, it should be from you eating the night before, and ideally it's 12 hours. But the thing that I like to do is get it within the first hour or two that you're up. So if someone says, oh yeah, I get up at 5 o'clock, but the lab opens at 7, so I'm just going to have water and go get my labs drawn at 10 a.m. I don't like that. I do like that fasting blood sugar to be drawn kind of at the beginning of that day. Great.
Are the slides that you showed tonight available on your website somewhere? You went through this pretty fast.
Oh, and I took so much stuff out. They're being we're being videoed tonight, so we will put the YouTube video up on the website, and I'd be happy to figure out if Rachel can figure out how to put the PowerPoint up. I'll put the PowerPoint up. I'm sure she can figure it out.
What's your website?
We'll put it on Northwest Memory Center, and I'll put it. So I have two websites. One is for the Brain Clinic, northwestmemorycenter.com. And then the website that I've had for 5 or more years is DrDeborahMD.com.
Is that where the ice cream is going to be?
It's going to be on both.
There weren't many pictures of dairy. I'm wondering how dairy fits into anti-inflammatory.
Really good question of how dairy fits in. So the first thing to clear off the table is that so not everybody who gets Alzheimer's has the ApoE4 gene. There's other genes, and some people have no genes at all, and they get Alzheimer's disease. But if you have ApoE4, we have a high suspicion that dairy is going to be inflammatory for you. So for those people, we really double look at their genes and their inflammation, and if they're fine with it, great. If you don't have the gene, dairy is definitely, for most people, safer than grains, which for most people are safer than that particular grain, gluten. So if somebody comes in and they're terribly inflamed, autoimmune disease or irritable bowel or whatever, you should go off grains and legumes and dairy for 6 weeks, and we'll pull things back in as we can. If somebody's doing great and we're just doing fine tweaking, there are definitely... So Dr. Bredesen would say dairy is the lesser part of your fat content, that it should come more from olive oil and avocados and coconuts and nuts, but definitely with some room for dairy, and more so for people who don't have the ApoE4 gene.
Could you tell me again about the antihistamine?
And
Antihistamine?
right.
Like Zyrtec, which I took all winter.
So any antihistamine has a detrimental effect on the mitochondria, the powerhouses in your cells.
Yes, so you said, how does that work?
How does it work?
Well,
It interferes. So there are about 4 really complex pathways that each have to take 2 or 3 steps to deliver energy to the mitochondria. And antihistamines, I'm not sure which of those pathways they interrupt, but they definitely reduce the fuel and, in fact, exert a toxic effect on the mitochondria.
oh my God.
So somebody who has, somebody came in today, a patient came in today, and he said, I have a constant, snuffly, runny nose. It's always bothering me. And I will always look deeper than say, oh, try rinsing your nose out with salt water. Yes, okay, but he's tried that because he's looked on my website. And so we'll look a little deeper, do nasal swabs to see if there's some kind of bug living up there that shouldn't be. Maybe you have an allergic reaction because you live in a water-damaged house, and this is the first evidence of your mold toxicity. When I took the seminar with Dr. Bredesen almost 2 years ago, there was a whole section on the things that can cause brain damage that were really outside my comfort zone: mold toxicity and heavy metal toxicity. I mean, those were laughable when I went to medical school. But now I would say I'm pretty well versed in them because they're very significant, have significant impact on health. just driving here, you inhaled more toxins than your grandparents saw in their lifetime. And yes, our kidneys, skin, livers, urine, feces, all do a pretty good job, but in different people with different toxins and different genetics, some people get stuck doing certain things. They can't get all the mercury out, or they get a big exposure to cadmium, or they are genetically particularly susceptible to molds. About 25%. So if we all walked into a moldy building, we'd all inhale mold. The mold would make toxins that would go in our body and be fat soluble and be harmful. And we'd walk out of the building and 75% of us would clean up the mess over the next few days. And 25% of us would have a really hard time cleaning up the mold, the mess made from the mold exposure.
What you're saying about antihistamines seems a little shocking to me because I read a lot of medical literature and I can't see that I read much about this.
So yeah, I would just Google antihistamines, dementia, antihistamines all cause mortality.
Well, I guess I'm sure I can find it, but my guess is, as you know, in the general public,
Right.
people take massive amounts continually of antihistamines, and it seems like there should be a public service announcement or something.
I agree. Okay, I'll put that on my website. I'll do a big thing about I mean, it's true. I mean, so I remember seeing the effect of antihistamines on my little girl when she had a cough. You know, I finally decided that it wasn't really good for her to sleep 12 hours, even if her coughing was bothering me, you know, in the middle of the day, it wasn't so good. And if I can really, so I have an easy time understanding their toxic effect because I must have genetics that make me very susceptible to antihistamines. I think there are definitely some people who take some of the more like Zyrtec is better than Benadryl, and some of the others are if it has less of an effect on you in general, it's less harmful, but it's still interfering with the energy production in the mitochondria.
Is trazodone different than the regular antihistamine?
So trazodone is an antidepressant and a sleeping pill. And when you come to so do we have this? We have one night that's just about sleep, right? We're talking about sleep. Oh, okay. Well, we will. It was a dream of ours. So to have those 8 hours of natural sleep, like there's mostly lifestyle things that I tell people to do. But then from then we'll move on to supplements. You know, there's certain supplements that as long as they mimic something that's already in your body, that still counts as natural sleep. And then there's 2 prescription medications that when you take them, you still get real sleep. Meaning, so real sleep is you're cut off from the world around you, you're retrievable, you can be wakened up, and you have typical brainwave excursions during the night. So you have to have all 3 of those things to have natural sleep. And you can get them with low-dose trazodone and low-dose gabapentin. Pardon? So for trazodone, it might be anywhere from 25 to 70. You know, if somebody could only sleep with 150 milligrams of trazodone and they slept, I would say that would be great. Gabapentin, I'm uncomfortable going above 300 or 400 at night for sleep.
How about valerian root?
That's a great supplement, you know, that helps your body make GABA. So
that
counts as natural sleep. It's plugging into a natural pathway. One more.
Melatonin.
Of course, melatonin. You know, so it's the dose that works for you, and the younger you are, the lower the dose, and the older you are, the more willing I am to go to higher doses. And then if you have a complicated medical history, like if you've had, melatonin has 2 main purposes in the body. It helps you sleep, and it is an immune system modulator. So if you've had 1 or 2 cancers, particularly breast, colon, melanoma, you're probably melatonin deficient. So those people, I could go up to 20 milligrams. I've never taken that much, but. Anyway, thank you all for coming. We're not really leaving yet, so we're going to mull around and answer any other questions. Thank you.